The champagne flute was already sweating in my hand by the time I realized no one had saved me a seat. Crystal light spilled across the dining room, bouncing off white plates and gold-rimmed glasses like something out of a magazine spread. The kind of room where laughter came easy, where futures were toasted before they even began. A banner stretched across the far wall in elegant script. "Congratulations, Madison." My niece stood at the center of it all, glowing in a tailored navy dress, her acceptance packet tucked proudly under one arm. Stanford. Full admission. Partial scholarship. The rest, everyone knew, had worked itself out. I had worked it out. I moved quietly along the wall, setting down the printed itinerary I'd organized earlier that morning. Dinner order confirmed. Tuition payment scheduled. Housing deposit already wired. I double-checked everything twice, like I always did. Habits formed from years of making sure nothing fell apart when everyone else assumed it wouldn't. The room smelled like rosemary chicken and warm bread. Expensive. Comforting. Someone laughed too loudly near the bar. Someone else clinked a glass for attention. I smiled automatically, even as I noticed how conversations curved around me, never quite landing. Madison didn't see me at first. She was busy explaining her course plan to a couple of her parents' friends, her hands moving confidently through the air as she talked about internships and study abroad programs. She looked so sure of herself. I remembered when she was small, how she used to hold my finger crossing the street, like the world was too big without an anchor. A chair scraped loudly behind me. I turned, expecting an apology. Instead, a woman I didn't recognize gave me a polite nod and said, "Could you grab more napkins when you get a chance?" I froze for half a second. Then I nodded back. "Of course," I said, because correcting people had never come naturally to me. I retrieved the napkins from the kitchen, my reflection briefly catching in the stainless steel fridge. Simple black dress. Hair pulled back. Neutral. Forgettable. I looked exactly like someone meant to blend into the background. When I returned, Madison finally noticed me. "Aunt," she started, then paused as someone beside her asked a question. She turned back to them, finishing her thought before circling her gaze toward me again. "Oh," she said lightly, smiling. "You can just leave those on the counter. The help will handle it." The word landed softly, almost playfully. Almost. A few people chuckled. Someone nodded, unbothered. No one corrected her. Not her parents. Not her friends. Not even Madison herself. She had already turned away, glass raised, future unfolding effortlessly in front of her. I stood there, napkin still in my hands, my pulse loud in my ears. The help. I thought of the wire transfer confirmation sitting unread on my phone. The one that covered her housing, $18,750. The tuition payments before that. The books. The fees. The emergencies. The quiet promises I'd kept when no one else wanted to talk about money. $90,000. I placed the napkins down carefully, smoothing the stack so it wouldn't look sloppy. My hands didn't shake. Not yet. I told myself it was just a word. A misunderstanding. Something I could laugh off later when the room was quieter and Madison was less distracted. Still, something shifted. The laughter sounded sharper. The lights felt harsher. I noticed how I stood, just slightly apart from the circle like I had been all evening. Like I always was. Madison raised her glass, beaming. "To new beginnings," she said. Everyone cheered. I lifted my empty hand instead. And in that moment, surrounded by celebration, I felt something fragile inside me finally begin to crack. I stayed for another hour after that, long enough to prove, mostly to myself, that I wasn't dramatic. That I could stand there, smile when spoken to, refill glasses when asked, and pretend the word help hadn't lodged itself somewhere deep in my chest. The dinner moved forward, without me in it. Plates were cleared. Desserts arrived. Someone dimmed the lights so Madison could blow out candles shaped like the numbers 1 and 8, symbolic, they said, of new adulthood. I clapped with everyone else, the sound of my hands dull and distant, like it belonged to someone else. When it finally ended, people hugged Madison goodbye, promising visits and connections and letters of recommendation. Her parents were radiant, already telling stories about dorm move-in day as if the hardest part was over. No one asked how it had been arranged. I slipped out quietly, my coat folded over my arm. The night air outside felt sharp, almost punishing, and I welcomed it. It was easier to breathe when no one expected anything from me. In my car, I sat for a long moment before turning the key. My phone buzzed once. Then again. A text from Madison. "Don't be weird about earlier. You know I was joking." I stared at the screen, the blue light reflecting off the windshield. My fingers hovered, unsure how to answer.
I typed something.
Deleted it. Typed again. It didn't feel like a joke to me. I finally wrote. 3 dots appeared. Disappeared. Appeared again. "You're overreacting," she replied. "Everyone knows you help out. That's not a bad thing."
Help out.
I dropped the phone onto the passenger seat and drove home. My apartment was quiet, the kind of quiet that presses in on you once the adrenaline fades. I set my coat down, kicked off my shoes, and went straight to the kitchen. The grocery bag I'd picked up earlier was still on the counter. Inside was a small cake I'd planned to bring to the dinner, a backup just in case. I hadn't needed it. I cut myself a slice anyway. The frosting had softened too much, sliding slightly off the side. I ate it standing up, not tasting much of anything. Later, I opened my laptop. The tuition portal was already bookmarked. Muscle memory. I logged in without thinking, my fingers moving through passwords I knew by heart. The screen loaded slowly, then resolved into neat rows of numbers and dates. Fall semester balance due, $22,500. Below it, a note in smaller text, payment deadline approaching. I scrolled. Housing, meal plan, student fees. All the familiar categories, all the quiet ways money disappeared. I clicked into the payment history, watching the list of transactions populate the screen. My name was on every single one. A soft knock came at my door, startling me. I closed the laptop quickly, my heart jumping. It was my neighbor, Claire, holding a small envelope. "This got left in my mailbox by mistake," she said. "I thought it might be yours." Inside was a thank you card from the university. Generic. Polite. Addressed to primary financial contributor. Not aunt. Not family. Contributor. Claire smiled kindly, her eyes flicking to my face, as if she sensed something was off. "Big night?" she asked. "Something like that," I said. After she left, I sat back down at the table, the card still in my hand. The words blurred slightly as my vision stung. I didn't cry. I'd gotten good at that. Instead, I folded the card once. Then again. My phone buzzed on the table. Another message from Madison. "Hey, can you send the rest of the payment tomorrow? The deadline's coming up and Dad says you'll handle it like always." I stared at the message, my chest hollowing out. On the screen, the balance due glowed patiently, waiting for me to do what I always did. And for the first time, instead of opening my banking app, I closed the laptop entirely. The silence that followed felt heavier than anything I'd carried all night. I didn't always notice when it started. Most things like this don't announce themselves. They slide in quietly, wearing the face of responsibility, dressed up as love. Madison was 11 the first time I wrote a check for her. It was for a school trip, Washington, D.C., and her parents were short that month. Her mother, Karen, had called me late at night, voice already tired before she said hello. "You're so good with money," she'd said. "And you don't have kids yet." I hate to ask, but I'd said yes before she finished the sentence. I always did. Back then, it felt temporary. A one-time thing. Family helping family. I told myself it was what adults did, stepped in when there was a gap. Madison had hugged me before she left for the trip, arms tight around my waist, whispering, "Thank you, Auntie. I won't forget this." She did forget. Or maybe she learned something else entirely. The requests grew slowly, almost politely. Soccer fees. Summer programs. A new laptop when the old one just stopped working. Each ask came wrapped in reassurance. "Just this once. Next year will be easier. You're the responsible one." That phrase followed me everywhere. At Christmas, I'd slip envelopes under the tree instead of wrapping gifts. At birthdays, I'd cover the party venue when the deposit bounced. When Madison got into private high school, everyone celebrated her brilliance.
No one talked about the tuition.
I paid it anyway, $14,000 the first year. Then $15,500. Then more. I stopped going on vacations. I told myself I preferred staying in. I stopped upgrading my car. I told myself it still ran fine. I learned how to stretch grocery budgets and delay doctor appointments and convince myself that wanting less was a virtue. Madison flourished. She learned to speak confidently to adults, to expect solutions, to assume someone else would handle the inconvenient details. When college applications came around, she treated the process like a formality. She aimed high elite schools out of state tuition, because why wouldn't she? The night the acceptance email arrived, she called me first. I got in, she said breathlessly. I knew I would, but still, wow. I congratulated her. I meant it. Then came the pause. So, she continued, voice shifting just slightly, the scholarship doesn't cover everything. But Mom says you'll help me figure it out. Help me figure it out. That was when the numbers started to crystallize. I sat at my dining table with a legal pad, writing everything down. Tuition.
Housing. Books. Fees.
For years. $90,000. I remember staring at the total, my pen hovering uselessly above the paper. It was more money than I'd ever spent on anything in my life. More than my annual salary, spread out but relentless.
I should have said no then.
Instead, I heard Karen's voice in my head. Your family. I heard Madison's laughter from years ago, sticky with ice cream, trusting and warm. I heard my own conditioning, polished over decades. Don't make things harder. Don't disappoint. Be useful. So I agreed. The payments became routine. Automatic. I scheduled them months in advance, aligning my life around deadlines that weren't mine. I told myself it was an investment. In her future. In something that mattered. The first time I sensed something was wrong was small. A photo Madison posted online during her freshman year. She stood on a marble staircase, dressed in a coat that cost more than my monthly rent. The caption read, "Grateful for my parents who make all of this possible." The comments flooded in with praise. Heart emojis. Congratulations. My name wasn't there. I refreshed the page twice, stupidly expecting it to appear. It didn't. That night, I scrolled through my bank statements, highlighting tuition payments like evidence. I felt foolish for needing proof, even alone. As if my contribution only mattered if it was seen. Over time, the erasure became normal. When people asked Madison how she managed such an expensive school, she shrugged and said, "We figured it out." When relatives praised her parents for their sacrifice, no one corrected them. And I let it happen, because correcting the story would have meant correcting my place in it. The final betrayal didn't come quietly. It came dressed as a joke, in a room full of people, under bright lights and celebration. One word that collapsed years of sacrifice into something menial. Replaceable. The help. That was when the pattern finally snapped into focus, not as generosity, not as love, but as a role I had been trained to play. And once you see something clearly, you can never unsee it. 3 days passed after the dinner before the next message arrived. I knew it would. Patterns don't break on their own. They wait for permission. I was at work when my phone buzzed, face down on my desk. I didn't flip it over right away. Something in my body already knew what it would be. That familiar tightening in my chest. The shallow breath. The quiet bracing. When I finally looked, it wasn't Madison. It was an email from the university's financial office. Subject: urgent. Outstanding balance. Immediate action required. My fingers felt clumsy as I opened it. The message was polite, clinical. A reminder that Madison's spring semester housing confirmation required immediate payment. The amount was listed clearly, without apology. $24,300 due within 72 hours. Below it, a breakdown. Upgraded residence hall, private room, extended meal plan. Add-ons I hadn't approved. Choices I hadn't been asked about. I stared at the number, my mind doing that strange thing where it floats just above reality, refusing to land. Then my phone buzzed again. This time, it was Madison.
Hey,
Did you see the email? I need you to send that today so I don't lose my room. I read it twice. No greeting. No explanation. No thank you. Just need. My hand started to shake, subtle at first, like a vibration under the skin. I stood up from my chair and walked to the restroom, locking myself into the far stall where no one would hear me breathe too fast. I typed back carefully. I wasn't aware you upgraded your housing. Her response came almost instantly. Yeah, it's better for networking. Everyone important lives there. It's kind of expected. Expected. I leaned my head back against the stall door, the cool metal grounding me. My chest felt tight, like something heavy had been set there without my consent. That's a lot of money, I wrote. We should talk about it first. There was a pause this time. Longer. Deliberate.
then,
I don't have time to talk. The deadline's real. Please don't make this stressful. Please don't make this stressful. I laughed quietly, the sound brittle and unfamiliar. Stressful. As if this hadn't rearranged my entire life. As if I hadn't built my finances around her deadlines, her choices, her future. As if my stress was irrelevant unless it inconvenienced her. I left the restroom and went back to my desk, but I couldn't focus. Numbers blurred on my screen. Every thought circled back to the same realization, sharp and unavoidable. They weren't asking anymore. They were assuming. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open, the same place I'd sat so many times before. The payment portal loaded slowly, each second stretching longer than the last. The balance glowed on the screen, patient and demanding. I opened my banking app in another window. My savings. My emergency fund. The account I'd labeled later for future I never quite reached. Covering the payment would wipe out almost all of it. I placed my hand flat against my chest, feeling my heartbeat thud unevenly beneath my palm. My breathing was shallow now, my shoulders tight. This wasn't generosity anymore. This was erosion. My phone rang.
Karen.
I let it go to voicemail. It rang again. And again. Finally, a text. Madison is very upset. I don't understand why you're doing this right now. I stared at the words, something inside me finally settling into place. Not exploding. Not shattering. Settling. They would never understand, because understanding would require them to see me as more than a function. More than a resource. More than something to be used until empty. I closed the banking app. For a long moment, I just sat there, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, the quiet of my apartment pressing in around me. My hands stopped shaking. My breathing slowed. A single thought surfaced, clear and steady. If I send this payment, nothing will change. If I don't, everything might. I looked back at the screen, at the number waiting for my approval. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel afraid of what would happen next. I felt ready. I waited until morning. That alone felt different. Usually, I acted immediately, jumped when asked, solved problems before they could become uncomfortable for anyone else. But that night I slept. Not well, but enough to wake with a strange steadiness in my body, like something had aligned while I wasn't watching. Sunlight spilled across my kitchen floor as I made coffee. The apartment felt quieter than usual, as if it were holding its breath with me. I sat at the table, wrapped both hands around my mug, and opened my laptop. The tuition portal loaded. Same layout. Same numbers. Same expectation. I read the email from the university again, slower this time. Then Madison's messages. Then Karen's missed calls. I didn't replay the dinner. I didn't rehearse arguments. I didn't imagine outcomes. I focused on what was directly in front of me, the way I did when something mattered. I clicked into the payment screen. My cursor hovered over the amount field. For a moment, muscle memory tried to take over. My fingers twitched, ready to type, to comply, to make the problem disappear. Instead, I deleted the saved payment method. The screen refreshed. A small notification appeared at the top. Payment method removed successfully. My chest tightened, then loosened. like a knot slipping free. I opened a new email window. I didn't write much. Madison, I won't be able to make this payment. I've covered what I can, but I'm stepping back from funding your education going forward. I hope you're able to make arrangements with the financial office.
And
I read it twice. It was calm.
clear.
No apologies. No explanations layered thick enough to invite debate. I hit send. The silence afterward was immediate and profound. No alarms. No dramatic music. Just the soft whir of my laptop fan and the distant sound of a car passing outside. I closed the computer. For a few seconds, my hands shook anyway. Not from fear, exactly, more like release. Years of held breath, leaving all at once. I stood up and opened the window, letting cold air rush in. It smelled like rain and pavement and something new. My phone buzzed on the counter. I didn't look. Instead, I put on my shoes and stepped outside. The sky was overcast, low and gray, but the air felt lighter than it had in days. I walked without a plan, past the coffee shop I rarely visited because it felt indulgent, past the park where kids climbed on wet metal bars, laughing without restraint. I bought myself lunch. Nothing fancy. Soup and bread. I sat by the window and ate slowly, tasting every bite. The world didn't end. The ground didn't give way beneath my feet. Back home, I did something small but deliberate. I logged into my bank account and renamed one of my savings folders. The one that had always been labeled tuition. I changed it to mine. The word looked strange on the screen at first. Then it settled. That evening, I cooked dinner, real dinner, not something rushed or skipped. I played music softly, letting it fill the apartment. When my phone rang, I glanced at the screen. Madison. I let it go to voicemail. Another call followed. Then a text. I don't understand why you're doing this. Do you know what you're putting at risk? I read it once. Then I placed the phone face down and kept stirring the pot. Later, after I ate, I stood at the sink and washed my dishes by hand, warm water running over my fingers. I noticed how bright the kitchen felt, how uncluttered the counters looked, how my shoulders weren't hunched the way they usually were. Before bed, I opened the window again and locked it once the room cooled. The click of the latch echoed softly, final and reassuring. I stood there for a moment, hand still on the frame. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't punishment. It was a boundary, quiet, solid, and entirely mine. For the first time in a long while, I felt in control of my own life. And I slept. The backlash didn't arrive all at once. It came in waves, each one louder than the last, as if volume alone could force me back into place. It started with messages. Madison first, long paragraphs now, no longer clipped. Her tone swung wildly between panic and accusation. I trusted you. You promised. Do you know how embarrassing this is? She sent screenshots from group chats, emails from the housing office, highlighted deadlines meant to scare me into action. I didn't reply. Then Karen called. I answered on the third attempt, more out of curiosity than obligation. What is going on with you? She demanded, skipping any greeting. Madison is hysterical. She could lose her housing. Do you have any idea what that would do to her reputation? I leaned against the counter, the phone warm against my ear. I do, I said evenly. And I'm not paying. There was a sharp inhale on the other end. So you're just abandoning her? No, I said. I'm stepping back. That's the same thing, Karen snapped. After everything we've done for you. I almost laughed at that. Instead, I asked quietly, what have you done for me? Silence stretched, brittle and revealing. You're being cruel, she finally said. This isn't who you are. I thought about that after we hung up. About how often people confuse compliance with character. How easily kind becomes useful in someone else's mouth. The next day, Karen showed up at my apartment. I knew it was her before I opened the door. The knock was too sharp, too insistent. When I did open it, she stood there with Madison beside her, both of them rigid with barely contained fury. Madison's eyes were red, but her posture was defensive, chin lifted like she was bracing for a fight. You can't do this, she said immediately. You're ruining everything. I stepped aside, letting them in. The calm in my body surprised me. It held, even as the air shifted, thick with accusation. Karen gestured around my apartment. Look at this place, she said. You're fine. You don't need the money the way she does. Madison crossed her arms. I wouldn't have chosen that housing if I'd known you were going to pull this. I met her gaze. You didn't ask, she scoffed. Because I didn't think I had to. There it was. I took a breath, slow and measured. I've paid nearly $90,000 for your education, I said. I won't continue. Karen's voice rose. So you're punishing her over a joke now? It wasn't a joke, I replied. And this isn't punishment. It's a boundary. Madison's face twisted. So, what after all this, you're just done being my family? The words landed heavier than anything else. For a moment, I saw her as she'd been at 11, clutching her backpack too tight. The memory passed. I've always been your family, I said. But family doesn't mean unlimited access to someone else's life. A knock sounded at the door then, sharp but controlled. We all turned. When I opened it, a uniformed building manager stood there, expression neutral. We received a noise complaint, he said, glancing past me. Karen stiffened. Madison looked suddenly small. We're fine, I said calmly. They were just leaving. The manager nodded once, his eyes flicking to the two of them. All right. Let me know if you need anything. The authority of that moment, someone else witnessing, someone else validating my right to peace, settled something deep in my chest. Madison looked at me one last time, her voice cracking. I thought you cared about me. I do, I said. That's why I'm doing this. Karen opened her mouth to argue again, but I shook my head gently. This conversation is over. I held the door open. They left without another word. When the door closed behind them, the silence that followed wasn't empty. It was earned. I locked the door and leaned my forehead against it, exhaling slowly. My phone buzzed once more, a final message from Madison. I hope you're happy. I didn't answer, because for the first time I was. The house felt different the morning after they left. Not quieter, just clearer. Like a room after smoke has finally drifted out through an open window. I woke without the usual heaviness in my chest, the familiar mental checklist already forming before my feet hit the floor. For years, my days had begun with other people's needs pressing in first. Deadlines, payments, emergencies that weren't mine. That morning, there was nothing urgent waiting for me. I made coffee and sat by the window, watching sunlight slide slowly across the opposite building. I realized I was breathing more deeply than usual, my shoulders resting where they belonged instead of creeping toward my ears. Later that day, there was a knock at my door. It was Claire again, holding a small paper bag. I've baked too much, she said with a sheepish smile. Thought you might like some. Inside was banana bread, still warm, the top cracked just right. I thanked her, and she hesitated, then added gently, I heard some raised voices yesterday. Everything okay? I considered the question. Yeah, I said finally. It is now. She smiled like she understood more than I'd said. At work, things shifted too. Not dramatically, just enough to notice. I told my supervisor I wouldn't be staying late for a while. She nodded without question. A coworker I barely knew offered to help with a project I usually handled alone. No one acted like I owed them for it. That surprised me. In the evenings, I started opening my laptop again, but not for tuition portals or payment confirmations. I pulled on my bank statements and laid everything out clearly, line by line. For the first time, I looked at my finances without bracing myself for loss. There it was. The real number. The amount I'd been giving away so quietly I hadn't let myself add it up all at once. $90,000. Seeing it all together was sobering.
But it was also clarifying.
That money represented years of my life. Overtime hours. Skipped pleasures. Deferred dreams. It wasn't abstract. It was tangible. And it was gone. What surprised me most wasn't the grief. It was the relief. With the payments gone, my budget breathed. There was room where there had never been room before.
Space to plan.
Space to save.
Space to rest.
A few days later, a handwritten card arrived in the mail. It was from the university's financial office, addressed directly to me this time. It thanked me for my past contributions and confirmed that I was no longer listed as a responsible party on Madison's account.
Past.
The words settled gently in my chest. That weekend, I took myself to the farmer's market. I bought flowers without checking the price first. Bright ones. Yellow and white. I carried them home carefully, arranging them in a vase I'd never used because it felt too fragile for everyday life. I started noticing small kindnesses everywhere. A barista remembering my order. A neighbor holding the elevator. A coworker leaving a note that said, "You did great today." None of them needed me to prove my worth. One evening, as I was taking out the trash, I ran into an older woman from the third floor. She paused, studying my face. "You look lighter," she said matter-of-factly. I laughed softly. "I feel lighter." She nodded. "That's what happens when you stop carrying things that aren't yours." Back upstairs, I stood in my doorway for a moment before going in, taking in the space. The furniture hadn't changed. The walls were the same. But something fundamental had shifted. I thought about all the times I'd confused obligation with love. How often I'd stayed silent to keep the peace, even when it cost me my dignity. How small I'd made myself so others could stand taller. That night, I slept deeply. And in the quiet between dreams, a simple truth finally settled in. Real support doesn't demand. It shows up. Rebuilding didn't arrive as a dramatic overhaul. It came quietly in small, ordinary choices that added up to something steady. I started waking earlier, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. Mornings became mine again. I cooked real breakfasts, eggs, toast, fruit arranged carefully on a plate instead of eaten standing at the counter. I played music while I washed dishes. I let silence exist, without rushing to fill it. With the extra space in my budget, I did something that once would have felt reckless. I signed up for a weekend painting class. Nothing serious. Just acrylics and canvases in a sunlit room with strangers who didn't know my history. The first time I dipped the brush in a color, my hand hesitated. Then it moved freely, unconcerned with usefulness or outcome. I realized how long it had been since I'd done something simply because it made me happy. At work, I noticed changes too. Without the constant financial pressure, I spoke more confidently in meetings. I volunteered ideas instead of just solutions. My manager pulled me aside one afternoon and said, "You seem different lately." In a good way. I smiled. I feel different. Attempts at contact didn't stop completely. Madison emailed once, short and formal, asking if we could talk things through. Karen sent a message framed as concern. "Life is short. Don't you want peace?" I read them. I didn't respond. The absence of chaos was teaching me something important. Peace doesn't need defending when boundaries are clear. Instead, I leaned into what was growing. I repainted my bedroom a soft, warm color, something I'd always liked but never chosen because it felt impractical. I replaced a chair I'd been meaning to throw out for years. I framed one of my paintings and hung it above my desk, slightly crooked, unapologetically mine. I also made new connections. There was a woman from the painting class, Jenna, who invited me for coffee after noticing we both lingered too long over cleanup. We talked about books and bad apartments and the strange relief of starting over later in life. There was no expectation, no transaction. One evening, as I was walking home, I caught my reflection in a storefront window and barely recognized the woman staring back. Not because I looked younger or more polished, but because I looked settled, upright, like I belonged to myself.
Months passed that way.
Madison's name came up less often. When it did, it no longer carried the same sting. I heard through relatives that she'd rearranged her housing, taken on loans, adjusted. Life had gone on. So had mine. On a quiet Sunday afternoon, I planted flowers on my small balcony. Nothing extravagant, just hardy ones that would survive a little neglect. As I pressed soil around the roots, I thought about how carefully I'd tended other people's lives while ignoring my own.
This time, I stayed.
I washed the dirt from my hands and stood back, surveying this simple progress. The balcony looked brighter.
Lived in.
That night, I took a photo of it and set it as my phone background. Not to share. Just to remind myself of what choosing myself looked like. I went to bed with the window cracked open, cool air drifting in, and realized something quietly profound. My life no longer revolved around proving my worth. It was finally moving forward on my terms. A year passed without ceremony. No countdown. No dramatic marker. Just a quiet turning of days that slowly reshaped my life into something lighter, something honest. The mirror of that long-ago dinner came unexpectedly on a mild spring evening in my own apartment. A small gathering, nothing formal. A few friends from work. Jenna from my painting class. Claire from next door. The table wasn't polished to perfection, but it was full. Food I'd cooked myself. Laughter that didn't circle around me, but landed, stayed. Someone raised a glass, not to achievements, not to prestige, but to being together. I watched the moment unfold with a strange tenderness. A year ago, I would have been scanning the room, anticipating needs, making sure everyone else felt comfortable before I allowed myself to sit. That night, I stayed in my chair. I let someone else refill the water pitcher. No one mistook me for the help. Later, when the guests had gone and the dishes were stacked in the sink, I stepped onto the balcony. The flowers I'd planted months earlier had grown wild and confident, spilling over their pots without apology. I rested my hands on the railing and breathed in the cool air. Madison crossed my mind, not with anger, not even sadness, but distance. I'd heard she was doing fine. Loans. A part-time job. A different kind of learning than the one she'd expected. We'd exchanged a single message a few months earlier. Brief. Careful. Civil. There was no reconciliation, no grand understanding, but there was space. And for the first time, that space belonged to me. I'd learned something essential over the year. That love given out of fear becomes invisible. That generosity without boundaries teaches people how to take, not how to care. And that family, real family, is revealed not by who benefits from you, but by who respects you when you stop giving. Before bed, I opened the journal I'd started keeping after everything changed. I reread an entry from months back, written in shaky handwriting. I am allowed to choose myself, even if others don't like the choice. The words still held. I turned to a blank page and wrote something new, slower this time. Truer. Peace isn't something you earn by sacrificing yourself. It's something you protect.